Hey everyone, and welcome back. Before you watch this walkthrough, make sure that you pause the video and try the problem yourself. Even a partial attempt will make the explanation that much more useful. These videos are meant to support your problem-solving process, not replace it. Across a lot of my practice problems, I highlight different aspects of how to approach, break down, and reason through problems. So you're going to get the best benefit by watching multiple walkthroughs rather than treating any single one of my videos as a template that you can copy. With that, let's get started. Today we're getting started with a pretty common problem. Ask the user for a string and check if it's a palindrome. We can ignore all spaces and the casing. So casing does not matter. Let's copy this explanation over into our Java document and get started. All right, I've got everything started here. So I've decided to, in the spirit of continuously making new classes and keeping us with sort of exploring static classes and instance methods and all the things that we have previously done in the last few videos, I'm going to do this in separate classes. I'll have my main class, which is going to ask the user for the string, and then I'll go ahead and call my palindrome helper class to determine if the string that the user entered is or is not a palindrome. Let's get started here with our main, and we should know that we're going to ask the user for some information. So string input, ask user. Now I'm really going to break this down, as I always would, into multiple methods. Our main should be like our manager. It's just calling everything. So I'm going to make methods for everything else. Public static string ask user. And in here, I can go ahead and create a scanner, new scanner. Read in from the console is completely acceptable at this point. I'll go ahead and ask the user to enter any string or phrase, and I'll read that into a string line, sc.next line. We'll get the whole line, whatever the user inputs. If I want to make sure it's not empty, I could do that and ask again, but I think I'm actually going to take the stance that an empty string is technically a palindrome because there's no information in there that would suggest anything else. A string of length 0 should still be a string. So I'm not going to do any kind of error checking. I'll just return whatever line is created. So now I know I'll have my input from the user, and I can go ahead and call into my palindrome checker dot check palindrome. Oh, what did I call it? Palindrome helper. Sorry. Palindrome helper dot check palindrome, passing in the input. And I think what we'll do is we'll have this return a true or a false. Is palindrome. And then we can print out all of our information over here. We can say the user entered the input string. Whoops. And then we can say palindrome status, question mark, and we can just print out true or false accordingly. So now we've got all the information we need in our main. Without a method called check palindrome, we can't run this code and make sure it does what we hope. So I will actually just go ahead and add that very quickly to the other side. You'll notice that I did call it based on the class name right here on line 9. So it should be a static method, public static, and we said it's going to return a Boolean, check palindrome, and we're naming it there we go with our input. And for now, just for testing purposes, I'll just have it always return false, just so that I can make sure that the code I've written so far works as I expect it to, because as of right now, it actually won't. I just want to be able to test to make sure my scanner works. I can read in the line. I'm calling the right method so that the names line up, all of that good stuff. So let's go ahead and run my terminal. I'll go to where I've been storing all this, and I will first compile, and I'm going to find it's not going to compile because I cannot find the class scanner in my code. So that means I actually forgot to do my import, java.util.scanner. So I can import my scanner line, make sure now everything compiles as expected. I can run my main class. I can see it's telling me enter any string or phrase. This is a string/phrase. and it should print out the user entered with exactly what I wrote. This is a string/phrase, palindrome status, automatically returned false. Not a whole lot of fanfare, but at least now I know my general structure does work. Now, as far as I'm concerned, main should not have to change now for my code to run. So I'm actually going to go ahead and move this over here, and I'll reset my layout to be single because I don't really need to look over here now that I've tested it and I know that my main works as I expect. Now my focus needs to be here inside check palindrome. Now, a few things regarding check palindrome. We know we're supposed to ignore case and ignore spaces. Maybe we do that in two separate lines here. Anytime we have the word and, it usually means multiple responsibilities. So we should ignore case, we should ignore spaces. And then we need to actually see if something is a palindrome, meaning same forwards and backwards. Now, built into Java, there's actually a lot of really helpful methods that might help us solve this problem. However, I'm going to use none of them. I'm going to do everything manually, and I'm doing that on purpose. Now, what I see here is I see three separate statements. Ignore case, ignore spaces, is palindrome, same forwards and backwards. Now, depending on how I approach this problem and how I want to solve it, ignore case may or may not matter. I'm going to make it so that I can ignore case really easily by making a upper input of my string. I'll use input dot to uppercase, and this will take a string, any string, and automatically turn everything into uppercase. This will allow me to ignore the fact that sometimes an N is lowercase, sometimes an N is uppercase, whatever it might be. This will sort of allow me to ignore case by default because I've put it all into the same case. The next statement here says to ignore spaces. I'm going to go ahead and make a new string, no spaces input, and I'm going to remove all of the spaces. Now, again, this could be done with a one-liner if you know your Java methods, but I'm okay with you not. I'm going to go ahead and write these all out. Now, I'm going to call a remove spaces method on my upper input. It's important I remember to call on my upper input, not on my original input, because this is the one that I want to work off of. That's the one that's been transformed already. So now I should be able to go from any string to, any string like this. Now, remove spaces doesn't actually exist. It's a method I'm going to write. But you'll notice that this is a helper method. My palindrome helper class is going to use this to help remove the spaces. Main.java all the way over here doesn't need to know about this method. So I'm actually going to go ahead and make this a private static method. It will return a string with all those good spaces removed, upper input. Okay, so we can see that I've made this private, which means the only methods that can access this remove spaces method are methods inside palindrome helper. And I want that to be the case because I want to hide this method from the main. It doesn't need access to it directly, and so my code should reflect that. Now I can make my no spaces input right here, and it's going to start as just an empty string. And in order to remove my spaces, I'm going to literally go character by character in upper input, and if not a space, if not space, copy to no spaces input. Let's go ahead and build this out. So we're going to go character by character. So for int I is equal to 0, I is less than the length of my string, I++, and I'll go ahead and grab each character, cur char. This will be upper input dot get char at I. And as long as it's not a space, I'm going to copy it into my no spaces. So if my cur char is not a space, let's copy this comment in here so that it stays nice and close to that if statement. I can go ahead and say no spaces input plus equals the cur char. Now it's important to remember that this plus equals basically means, that the no space input is going to be equal to whatever is currently on the no space input plus the char. And that's really important because we do want to make sure we're building our string in the way that we're expecting. And since I said I'm taking any string and it's going to come back as any string like this, we're going to want to be building our string still in the forward fashion. The first letter is still the first letter, and so on and so forth, just with no spaces. If at this point you're recognizing this could be done with fewer loops, this could be done in a smarter way, you could do everything in one method. All of those things can be true. I'm again being explicit on purpose. Okay, so we have our remove spaces method, which is going to give us this no spaces input. Now the next thing we need to check if it's a palindrome, same forwards and backwards. Our no spaces input is already in the forward space. Let's give this a name like forward input, just so that we don't forget. Forward input is equal to no spaces input. And yes, again, I know that this is incredibly verbose, but I'm doing that intentionally because now I need to figure out how I can get the backwards input, so then I'll be able to do that same comparison. So let's go ahead and make another method call for our backwards input, and we will call reverse input, whoops, and we'll pass in our forward input variable. So now we'll have this any string that we got from the previous step, and it should return back whatever this is backwards, T, S, Y, and A. And then we'll be able to do our comparison between the two. All right, let's go ahead and make this method. Again, this is being called internal to this class, so it can be another private method. Private static string, and we need to take in the forward version. And this is actually going to be very similar to remove spaces in that we'll go character by character in our forward, and whoops, create a reversed string. So there's a couple different ways to do this loop. I'll go ahead and make my reverse string. And then what I'll do is I'll actually just go through my original forward string backwards. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the last character. I'll go while this is greater than or equal to 0, I minus minus, because now I can go ahead and reverse plus equals forward dot char at I. And I'll grab each character in reverse, put it onto my reverse string, and I can call reverse. There we go. I've returned it. I'll now have a reversed string. Now, before I do anything else, it might be a good idea to just confirm some of this information, like printing out my forward input here to make sure it's actually what I expect, or printing out my backwards input here to make sure it's what I actually expect. So let's clear this out down here, pull this up, recompile, make sure we don't have any errors. Oh, we do have an error here, identifier expected. I forgot to put a data type here, string upper input, make sure I did that correctly elsewhere. Recompile. One more concern here, upper input of type string. Isn't that what I named it? Upper input, string, upper input. Oh, get char. That's not the method. Char at. Look at that. And I did it right down here, but apparently I got confused when I made that method. And we're missing a return statement on line 25. We forgot to return this no spaces input. So it's a really good thing we're checking all of this now. Return no spaces input before we try to close out our code and it gets too complicated. Now I can compile it with no errors, so that's great. I can run it. Let's start with that any string that we were expecting, and make sure we got it forwards all caps and backwards all caps. And we can see that we didn't get that. We did indeed get that. Any string, any string. That is perfect. So it worked exactly as we intended. We still aren't doing the palindrome status correctly, although technically this is right. If I ran this again and I entered taco cat, I would expect to get a true, since taco cat and taco cat are the same forwards and backwards. So it's a palindrome. I'm still getting false because I'm still returning false, but we are getting the output we'd expect. So that's fantastic. So now we can go back to this check palindrome and recognize that all we need to do to check if it's the same forwards and backwards is do, a forward input dot equals, because it's a string, our backwards input. There we go. I'll leave these in for just a minute just so that we can see everything that's going on. Java, let's run it. We'll run it with any string again. And we are still getting false, so we didn't break anything by making that change. And we'll run it again. This time we can do taco cat with spaces. And now we're getting our palindrome status of true. Now, for really good measure, we should probably check things like hitting enter. So if we just hit enter, we do get true, as we said we would hope we would get. Java main. If we want to do maybe just one space, that comes back as true. Maybe just a single character. And that also comes back as true. So we can do some of that edge case testing just to make sure we like what we see. I would say it's looking really good. We can remove these two print statements that we just used so that we could sort of debug as we went. That was an accident. Recompile. Without those print statements in there, nothing is broken, and say that we now have a completely functional and correct working solution for a palindrome checking application. That's it, and now we've solved this problem. Now remember, you won't find my solution posted alongside this video. If you watch the walkthrough without first attempting the problem, stop here, close my solution, and try to write it yourself now. Post-walkthrough practice still counts. If you have questions about this problem or suggestions for future practice videos, please be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.